My fiancé and I get married this fall, and the cake has been a huge point of contention with my mom. Long saga, but the gist is that we wanted a dessert bar or cheesecake instead of a traditional cake. My mom initially insisted on having at least a small cake for just us to cut. We compromised and got quotes. Right before we put a deposit down, she decided that having just a cake for us and not for guests is tacky, so we needed to get a sheet cake to serve as well. We were annoyed because she was the one to suggest it, so we cut our losses and opted to do tiered cheesecake and mini cheesecakes, as we originally wanted. My mom would not let this go for the past 6 months. She then decided to focus on pushing for a groom's cake. My fiancé did not want one. When I told her this, she said it's really only a groom's cake in name and not about what he wants. I told her a firm no multiple times because she wouldn't give up. That brings us to this week. I got a text yesterday saying she was at the bakery and paid for the order. I got suspicious because I never included her in those communications. I called the bakery today and was told by a very apologetic employee that my mom had added a multi-tiered groom's cake with different fillings, flowers, the whole kit, and caboodle. We still have cheesecake, but I feel like it'll look silly next to what is essentially a wedding cake. My question now is, what do I do? She doesn't know that I know. I'm furious and hurt, obviously. It's just a cake, but it's not really about that now. She went behind my back and crossed multiple boundaries after I told her no. Am I being a bridezilla for not letting her have her traditional wedding cake? Relevant comment. Comment 1. Why should she have a cake at your wedding if you don't want cake? Just change the order back and call it a day. And add a password for all your vendors moving forward so changes can't be made without it. Oop. Everyone I've spoken to has either been in the camp of, well, they're paying for the wedding, or not her wedding, not her cake. I think that's why I'm torn. Because yes, they are paying, but changing the order behind my back. I'm more upset about the violation of trust than the actual cake, I think. Comment 2. It is not just a cake. It is a breach of your boundaries and your wishes. Cancel her order. Put a password on all your wedding accounts. You are not marrying her. You are marrying your partner. Exactly. It's the breach of trust that's been the most upsetting. I need to call back tomorrow and see if it's possible to cancel and get a refund since she paid in full. I suspect she did that intentionally, thinking she was being so clever. Comment 3. Ask the bakery to convert the cake into additional cheesecake and mini cheesecakes. Maybe a smaller groom's cake that looks nothing like a wedding cake. Do not tell her you did this. When you go to the bakery, have a password put on the order so it cannot be changed after you make the appropriate changes. She thinks she got something over on you. If she does check on it, the password will stop her from making any other changes. If she shows up at the venue with yet another cake, instruct the people at the venue to put it in the back and not bring it out. Oop. Thanks for the advice. Having the cake changed to more cheesecakes is a good idea. Never in a million years did I think I'd have to become like one of the Redditors and password protect my wedding, but here we are. Update, December 30th, 2023, 3 months later. Hello again. A big thank you to everyone who gave advice on my original post. I'm now married and had the best, most relaxing honeymoon with my now husband, without any pesky family bothering us. By the time I posted, it was too late to cancel the wedding due to deposits and contracts, so it continued as planned. And to clarify, yes, my parents did pay for the wedding, although my husband and I made it clear several times that we did not expect or need them to pay for everything. No, I don't think paying excuses my mom's actions. My parents reiterated that it was our wedding and we should do what we wanted. Clearly, the cake was the exception to this, though. She had previously said to get cheesecake if that's what we wanted. My husband and I got a laugh out of everyone's suggestions for how to handle the cake. Initially, I wanted to go the petty route and surprise my mom by calling the bakery to change the cake design to something she would find tacky that would reflect my husband's hobbies, like a groom's cake should do. After taking a few days to weigh my options, I knew my desire for petty satisfaction would nuke my relationship with my mom, which had truthfully never had this dynamic up until wedding planning. I knew that she absolutely was the one in the wrong and acting like a child, and while I'm the actual child in the relationship, I wanted to be mature and handle this like an adult, if only for my own moral high ground. I communicated with my parents and listed all the reasons why this situation, and others throughout the wedding planning process, was hurtful and completely out of line. Shock of the century to everyone on Reddit. I'm sure it didn't go well. There was a series of texts I received from my mom that demonstrated she couldn't take accountability or comprehend that I wasn't mad that she ruined my wedding by ordering a cake, but rather that she went behind my back knowing it would surprise and upset me on my wedding day. I attempted multiple times to redirect to the actual issue with little success. We ended the conversation with her apologizing for a cake, making my husband and me so upset. This obviously wasn't a genuine apology or the main issue, even if she thought it was. She also agreed to move the groom's cake to a meal we had the day before the wedding, which I was fine with. At this point, we were a week out from the wedding, and the thought of continuing to press the issue was too much for me to handle with everything else on my plate. I dropped the rope leading up to the wedding so I could refocus on enjoying my wedding as best as I could. I interacted with my mom as little as possible the day of, and our wedding party and coordinator did a fantastic job being a buffer. While I've had some contact with her since, it has dramatically declined so I can get some much-needed space. Obviously, we'll need to have some tough conversations, but I'm choosing to spend my time with my new husband and getting back into therapy first. Weddings, man, they really bring out the crazy in people. Oh, and the cheesecakes were a huge hit, BTW. Relevant comments. Mrs. Neville Bardos, I'm glad you had the day you wanted and enjoyed your honeymoon. Unfortunately, although previously this wasn't the dynamic you had with your mother, the fact she refused to see her error and wasn't apologetic. If I were you, I would bear that in mind for the future, i.e., other major events, children, etc., and plan accordingly. Oop. Oh, absolutely. The lack of respecting boundaries and breaking trust for future life events was actually something I pointed out in our conversation. She didn't seem to understand the point I was making, just kept going back to the cake and not the deeper issue. 1 year update, November 3rd, 2024. I'm back with a 1 year update on how my mom changed my wedding cake order without me knowing. People have reached out for an update, and coincidentally, I've had several friends get engaged who have similar family dynamics as mine. I've shared all of this with them, but I feel the need to blast this out online too. Now that I'm a year out, I can acknowledge that I love my husband and our life together, but having a traditional wedding was a big mistake. When I think back on our wedding day, I am devastated to admit that the few emotions I remember from that day were not how much I love my now husband and excitement over our future together, but anxiety over my mom and whether she was about to blow up. If you're recently engaged and have difficult family relationships or aren't completely sold on shelling out a ton of money on a wedding, please let this be yet another loud voice yelling at you. Elope. Have a courthouse wedding. Don't invite problematic guests. Do whatever you want to do, but for the love of God, avoid that family drama at all costs. I wish I would have stuck to what I originally wanted, eloping somewhere abroad. But alas, I made my decision and have to accept it. What I didn't mention in my initial posts was that my relationship with my mom immediately and irrevocably changed as soon as I became engaged. Even though I knew she could be a lot, I had no idea what I was in for. If I could do it all again, I would have stopped that wedding planning train in its tracks after the first few signs of craziness. The cake was, unsurprisingly, just the last straw of craziness that happened. Greatest hits include telling literally, and I mean literally, everyone she knew that we were getting engaged less than 10 minutes after my husband told my parents he planned to propose. Upon sharing the proposal photos with her, commenting on how big I looked in the photos, which are to this day ruined for me, told a family member who commented on how beautiful I looked at a pre-wedding event. Yeah, well, she's gained a lot of weight. Tried to crash my first look the day of my wedding. Acted hurt that she wasn't invited. Did crash my first look and threw a fit when my wedding coordinator wouldn't let her in. Made the wedding all about how she never had a say in anything and that I was the controlling, immature one. We do still have contact today, but it's limited, and I am very guarded with what I choose to share. She never genuinely apologized or acknowledged the stress and hurt she caused. Short of some major changes on her part, I don't see that happening. So yeah, the moral of the story is to absolutely soak up the fresh excitement of getting engaged, but seriously ask yourself if there's anyone in your life who will make wedding planning hell on earth. If you're oh so fortunate to have a character like that, have a plan to handle it, and be prepared to enforce those boundaries. And for the extra crazy families out there, maybe just elope. Additional information from Oop. Oop. I see how the wording was misleading, and I should have linked the 2 previous posts. The point of this was more so to serve as a cautionary tale to any engaged couples out there who are dealing with a situation like this. Learn from my mistakes. What starts as little complaints and drama can quickly snowball and permanently change relationships if you don't nip it in the bud. Oop on how to handle family issues on wedding planning. Oop. Fair enough. I've seen so many couples recently who are having issues with family very early on in wedding planning. So I wanted to share how, 1 year later, my family relationships are horrible because of one day, and it personally wasn't worth it for me. Yes, I regret not handling it earlier on and picking up on those red flags. Hindsight is 2020, and life can be more complicated than what's on paper. Now to the next story. Story 2. I was uninvited from a wedding, left humiliated in the rain while my boyfriend stayed at the event. Am I overreacting? Original post. Today, my partner, 24M, let's call him Eric, and I, 24F, were invited to the wedding of one of his oldest friends from school. We received our save-the-date months ago, and the invite was addressed to Eric and Vicky. Our invite stated we were invited for the whole shebang: the service, the breakfast, and the evening reception. Our RSVP required both of our dietary requirements for the breakfast, which we replied to ages ago. I thought this was pretty awesome and generous of the bride and groom, as I had never met either of them, and Eric was only close with the bride, so it was a very nice gesture. The wedding is a few hours away from where we live, and since neither of us drive, I booked train tickets in advance, which came to about £60 each return, and an Airbnb, which worked out at £90 between us. We don't earn a lot, so this is quite a big spend to justify. However, since they had invited us to the whole wedding, we thought it would be rude not to go. The bride also specified colors we should wear, so I bought a new outfit since I didn't have anything formal that would be suitable. Not the end of the world, but with Christmas coming up, it was a bit difficult, and I had to be really frugal all through November to make it work. Total spend was probably double what I would spend monthly on fun stuff like going out for dinner or drinks or new clothes. We got to the service, and it was beautiful. The bride looked lovely, and it was very emotional. I get nervous at weddings, couldn't say why, and so I hadn't eaten beforehand, figuring the 4-course breakfast would fill me up nicely. After the ceremony, we went straight into the venue to have drinks and sit down at tables. We were towards the back of the line into the venue, and so half the congregation had already sat down. We glanced at the seating plan, saw Eric's name, and headed over. There was no place setting for me. Eric found his name, but there weren't any free seats at the table. Eric sat down, and I asked an usher whether there was a mistake. He didn't know, so he waved over the bride. She and I had never met before, but she seemed friendly until she opened her mouth. "Oh no, you're not part of the breakfast. The invitation was just for the reception and service. You're welcome to come back later." This was in front of most of the guests who had already sat down in a big venue, probably 140-ish seats. The usher suggested I go to the pub. Eric didn't know what to do, but didn't want to cause a scene, so he stayed put and quiet. I quite literally have never felt so embarrassed and humiliated in my life. I left, and it was raining heavily. I hadn't brought an umbrella since it was an indoor wedding, and being in a rural place, I had to walk about 20 minutes to get anywhere else. The usher had suggested a pub where the other evening guests were, so I just kept walking, but my shoes were literally ruined and soaked through, as well as being pretty damn cold because it's December and I was dressed for a wedding. I got to the pub to find a handful of merrymakers drinking heavily at 2 p.m. in wedding clothes. I introduced myself kind of awkwardly, as they were total strangers, and they were luckily really nice. They invited me to sit with them and tell them about the service. All of them had only been invited to the reception. I asked one of them if I could see their invite, and it was crystal clear that they were evening guests. There was no mention of the service or the breakfast, nor their dietary requirements. I apparently was the only person who was invited and then uninvited to the whole do. I sat with them and had some food because I was starving, but they all started leaving to get ready at about 4 p.m. Being a total stranger, I didn't think it best to ask to come with them, but I had never been to this town before, and besides Eric, I didn't know anybody. Since being ejected at 1:30 p.m., I was expected to just hang until 7:30 p.m. when the reception started. So I left. I felt so unwelcome and unwanted that I just wanted to go home. The evening will start in about half an hour without me, but I just can't bring myself to attend, knowing that half the guests watched me being asked to leave by the bride herself. I traded in my train ticket, which was a return for tomorrow, and now I'm traveling back alone. I texted Eric to tell him, but he didn't respond. I've been holding back tears since I was ejected 6 hours ago, and I feel completely torn. I don't understand what happened with the invite, whether it was a mistake or whether I was just supposed to know that it was only for Eric, despite being addressed to both of us, despite asking for both of our dietary requirements. despite explicitly stating we were invited to the whole wedding. Part of me feels like I should have gone to the evening reception too, but I'm soaked through. My hair and makeup look awful, and my shoes are unwearable. I am barefoot on a really gross floor right now, and I'm freezing. I look like a mess, and I feel so stupid. Did I mess up here? I feel like I've just been totally run over, and I'm really upset that Eric didn't stand up for me or say anything or leave the breakfast with me. Although I think that's less because of malice and more that he's just a bit hopeless when put on the spot. I've never heard of a wedding where you invite a +1 by name, but then they aren't invited to as much of the wedding as the other half of the couple. Nobody else at the wedding had this happen. I don't see how it can be personal since I've never met any of them before. I'm really upset and can't wrap my head around how weird today has been. If this happened to you, what would you do? TLDR, went to a wedding, got uninvited halfway through. Am I overreacting by being hurt? Edit. So, this blew up way more than I expected. Thank you, everyone, for your words of support. It's really helped, and I've gone from a wobbly, wet mess to a cackling harpy with my big glass of wine. You guys don't hold back on your opinions, and I kind of love it. It's nearly bedtime here. Eric stayed at the party and presumably is still there. I came home and felt a lot better knowing how shitty a situation this was. Karma's a bitch, and when they go low, we go high. So, I'm going to go to bed and sleep on it and think about next steps in the morning. A lot of people think I should dump Eric, whereas that had never crossed my mind. I was mostly pissed off with the bride and the MOH, who may have been involved too. I don't know. Eric will be coming home sometime tomorrow, and we're going to talk. I want to hear his piece because he's been drinking since lunchtime. He might just be a dumb bum rather than a full-blown asshole. Either way, no wind-up sudden decisions right now. I will try to come back and update as and when anything else happens. Thanks, everyone. 3 relevant comments. Plain truthiness. The person who messed up was the bride, which is an utter word I don't use, but she is, and Eric, who is appalling. I absolutely cannot believe that he didn't walk out with you. What the hell was he thinking? Did he used to date the bride or the bride's sister? Funny you say that. The maid of honor is his ex, although we were not aware until we saw her name in the wedding booklet at the ceremony that she would even be there. However, there is a lot of bad blood between them. If she was going to intervene to remove anybody, it would have been him. Update. Basically, I went to a wedding of my boyfriend's oldest friend from school and got uninvited from the wedding breakfast as it was starting. My boyfriend stayed at the wedding. I hadn't expected the big reaction to my first post, and just want to say thank you to everyone who gave advice and was supportive. I was feeling super shitty when I initially posted, and after an hour of drinking wine and reading your comments, I felt a lot more sane and calm. I wanted to clarify a few things that people were confused about or that weren't clear in my first post. I'm in the UK, and our weddings are different to the way weddings are held in the US. Traditionally, there is a ceremony, the wedding breakfast, which is a sit-down 3-course meal. Although it's called breakfast, it is usually in the afternoon, followed by speeches, and then an evening reception, which is like a disco. It's not uncommon for people to invite only relatives and close friends to the ceremony and breakfast, then invite lots of evening guests for the reception. However, it is uncommon to invite somebody to the ceremony and reception but not the breakfast, as then they are kind of left to entertain themselves somewhere for 6 hours. Having talked to friends and coworkers since last weekend, what happened to me was a serious no-no in terms of etiquette. Me and Eric have been together for nearly a year and a half. We live together, and we have a pretty strong relationship. He had no past romantic connections with the bride, I'll call her Marie, which some people were asking about. They went to school together from the age of 4 to 10 and remained in touch as pen pals/Facebook friends since then. They rarely see each other in person, and the wedding was the first time he would see her in about 2 years. There was zero phone signal at the venue. We noticed this when we arrived for the ceremony and were a little annoyed, as the wedding had a hashtag which we couldn't exactly tweet about with no signal. This is important later. We didn't know this until we arrived at the wedding, but the maid of honor, Helen, was Eric's ex-girlfriend. They were together for 3 years, and she cheated on him and dumped him. They have a lot of bad blood and do not have any contact with each other. Okay, so on to the update. After leaving the ceremony, I got straight on the train and went back to my hometown. I was on the train when I wrote my first post. When I got home, I told my parents everything, and they weren't particularly impressed, and like most of the posters here, they were perplexed that Eric hadn't come with me. My mom gave me a big hug, ran me a bath, and poured me a glass of wine, and I just tried to relax and forget about my day from hell. I still hadn't heard from Eric, but texted him to let him know I was home safe and would see him tomorrow. Eric texted me back at about 9 p.m. asking me what I meant by home. Home, or the Airbnb that we had booked nearby to the venue. I clarified, and he said, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Love you so much, X." Didn't really know what to make of it since the whole day had just been such a massive mess up, so I finished my wine, watched a Disney movie, and went to bed. The next morning, given I still hadn't really heard from Eric at all, I assumed he would be getting in at about midday, so I got up early and started wrapping Christmas presents. At 8 a.m., I heard a key in the door, and what do you know? It's Eric, still in his creased suit, with red eyes and looking like death. He wasn't really making sense, so I made him have a shower and warm up, made coffee, and decided to talk once he was looking human again. We sat down together and pieced together his side of the story. Basically, once I had left, Eric was absolutely livid with Marie. He had frozen like a deer in headlights when she was asking me to go and was kicking himself that he hadn't done the right thing. About 10 minutes after I left, Marie turned around and said, "Oh, actually, a few people haven't turned up. Get Vicky to come back. We have space for her now." Eric had tried to call me. Because there was no phone signal anywhere near the venue, he couldn't get through, and Marie pretty much immediately said, "Oh well, never mind." She didn't want to be here anyway, which obviously was a pile of crap and made Eric feel rubbish. The meal was a very formal sit-down affair, so he just kind of grinned and bore it, assuming I would be coming back in the evening. Eric was the only person mentioned in the speeches by Marie's father who wasn't a family member, and apparently, it was clear to everyone how disappointed he was that I wasn't there to share it with him. When I texted him at about 6 p.m. to let him know I was going home, he never received it. He was only able to text me at 9 p.m. by hiking down the road for 5 minutes to find a signal. All the while, his ex, Helen, was being sickly sweet, asking where I was. Why didn't I want to come and enjoy the party? Was I shy? Apparently with quite the evil glint in her eye, like she had got exactly what she'd wanted. Neither of us knew she was the MOH until we got there, and given their bad relationship, Eric was pretty pissed off that Marie had failed to mention she had such a prominent role in the wedding. Whether Helen was behind the seating error, I don't know, but if she was, then Marie was just as bad in enabling it to happen. So, Eric stayed at the wedding miserably and went back to the Airbnb afterwards alone. He barely slept, feeling angry at Marie and Helen for messing with us, and at himself for not sticking up for me, and left at 4:30 a.m. to get the first train home, hence why he was back at our place so early. He wasn't really apologetic to me at all. He didn't really seem to see how it was shitty for me. He more felt like he had been insulted by the situation and let down by his oldest friend. He is cutting off Marie and doesn't want anything else to do with her. So yeah, that was Eric's take on the whole thing. To be honest, I was pretty pissed that in all of this, he hadn't really considered how I felt or what it had been like for me getting thrown out of the wedding. While what he had gone through was pretty crummy, he at least had been warm, dry, and well-fed. The indignation of your girlfriend being removed from an event you're at isn't really as bad as being the girlfriend getting soaked in the rain, feeling humiliated, and all the rest. So we talked, and I laid out why I wasn't okay with what had happened and why his reaction wasn't okay. He can be a bit of a lemon sometimes, and this feels like one of those times he didn't step up to the plate. He just let the world wash over him and acted as a bystander. I'm still hurt by his actions, and he still hasn't really apologized properly. I don't know if he understands that he did wrong too. But this isn't a deal breaker for me. It's a heavy straw on the camel's back, but the camel is still standing. We have a really lovely Christmas coming up, and after a really long autumn of working hard, all I want is to go back to the happy place we were before this mess up, and honestly, I don't want to think about it. So, I know a lot of you guys are going to drag me over hot coals for this one, but we're still together. I'm not going to break up with him over this, but it's a big dark mark on his record as far as I'm concerned. He needs to get a lot of extra credit to get a pass this year. To use a terrible analogy, and I expect him to step up and really try to do better from now on. It's not really an ultimatum, but I'm willing to put this behind us if he can prove to me that he's invested and trying harder in this relationship from now on. If he doesn't, then I won't be sticking around. I love him a lot, but he needs to have my back and be empathetic to what I'm going through. I'm sorry that this wasn't the victorious breakup update so many of you wanted, but I want a nice, happy Christmas together. I'm not ruling it out as an option if things don't improve, but I want to give him another chance to prove this relationship is worth it. TLDR, Eric came home the next day. We talked. We're still together. Top comment. Throw _ the _ switch. Things to think about. If Marie said only 10 minutes after you left that you could stay, why didn't he come and physically find you after his call didn't go through? If Marie said only 10 minutes after you left that you could stay, why didn't he go and find a signal to call you, which was 5 minutes away, after his call didn't go through? Why didn't he try and find a signal to call you again, only 5 minutes away, until 9 p.m.? Relevant comments. It's all mine now. So, I know a lot of you guys are going to drag me over hot coals for this one, but we're still together. Yeah, that's the important thing. You haven't lost him. And as for dragging you over coals, you're going to be the one to live with this selfish, conceited carpet. So really, there's nothing more I can add that would push the point home more than some more occasions where he just dumps you at the side of the road because he's offended by how they disrespected him by treating you badly. _the_switches comment makes a good point. He didn't even try to catch you up, go down the road to contact you, or even leave in disgust because all he could think about was his own hurt feelings. You've got a great life coming. Oop. I've set a deadline in my head where I need to see significant improvement in a few areas of the relationship, which I have told him is important if he wants us to stay together, and if that doesn't happen, I'm gone. If he messes up big time before then, I'm gone. Just giving him one last chance to pull himself up by his bootstraps and prove it's worth staying for. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.